Having stopped the Witch King's plan to set up a White Lord in the Barrow Downs, we return back to the Prancing Pony to tell Strider, only to find out that he has gone and that Gandalf has appeared in the inn in his place. He tells us that he must follow along on the trail of Aragorn and the four hobbits, but he tells us that one of his order, Radagast the Brown, is known to be somewhere in the Lone Lands and sends us to find the rangers to see if we can find Radagast and enlist his aid. We travel to the north of Bree to the very edge of the festival grounds. There we come across a cabin where a ranger named Ceradan makes his abode. He tells us that he believes Radagast has traveled to the east into the Lone Lands, and sends us to the very shadow of Weathertop itself, where we make the acquaintance of another ranger named Candaith. Candaith says that he has heard of Radagast being in the Lone Lands, but that he does not know his exact position. He promises to search for him for us if we will go out and help thin some of the Crebine and some of the orcs which have taken refuge and set up camp within the Lone Lands themselves. Candaith says that he has never seen orcs with these particular markings on them of the White Hand before, and we find orders on a messenger that are written in the Black Speech, referencing a leader of the orcs named Uzor. Candaith feels that if we were to go to Uzor and get messages from him, that we'd find out just what it is the orcs are doing in this area. So we travel just to the north of Weathertop into a small secluded valley where the orcs have set up an fortress named Bleak Rift. Within the fortress, we confront and defeat the War Master Uzor, off of whose body we gain yet another message written in the Black Speech. We return back to the foothills of Weathertop and give the message to Candaith. He says that he will translate the message for us, but that first he wants us to do a very important mission for him. He says if we will travel to the top of Weathertop and investigate the strange flashes that he had seen on the peak of the summit the night before while we were out fighting at Bleak Rift. Arriving at the top of Weathertop, we find a scorched area where it looks like lightning strikes have occurred, and in the middle of it, there is a white rock with strange markings upon it. Returning to Candaith's camp, he tells us he does not know what the runes signify, but that he believes that one of the markings is a G, which he says could stand for Gandalf. In the meantime, he has translated the Black Speech letter, and he says that it is an indication that the orcs are moving to Weathertop in order to set it up as a base of operations for them, and that they will therefore be able to attack the entire area of the Lone Lands. That night, we accompany Candaith to Weathertop, where we fight our way up through the arriving orcish hordes to the very peak, where we take on Raigul, the Uruk-hai leader of the orc band, and his bodyguards and lieutenants, including a large mountain troll. Having defeated the orc incursion of Weathertop, Candaith informs us that he has finally located where Radagast has gone here in the Lone Lands. He sends us further to the east to a settlement of the people of the Lone Lands known as the Eglain, which is called Ostgurth. There, in a tower located at the far back of the settlement, we finally find the man we've been looking for, Radagast the Brown. Radagast tells us that the nearby swamp, the Red Marsh, has become quite sick lately, and sends us on a variety of missions to go in and gather information so that he can figure out what the issue is. From the presence of the evil spirits known as wights, just like the ones back in the Barrow Downs, he says that the swamp must be infested with gaunt lords, evil necromancers who normally are staged in Angmar, but for some reason have come this far south to plague the Lone Lands. He has us collect a number of their sigils so that he can tell who their lord may be. From these foul talismans, he determines that the leader of the Gaunt Men is Ivar the Blood-Handed. He says he is not that familiar with these surroundings, so he sends us down to the swamp of Harlag, where he says we need to meet a man named Arik the Stone Speaker. Arik sends us to enlist the shades of the dead men who once lived in this region of Middle-earth. They had once been leaders and chieftains of men while the king still stood in the northern kingdom. However, when Angmar came and began taking over these lands, they had stood aside and done nothing. So they were cursed by Tom Bombadil to wander the lands of shades and never find their rest, until the kingdom of Arnor came to be once more. He states that before the fall of Arnor, there was a beautiful spring in this land, and a graceful river daughter, one of the sisters of Goldbury, the wife of Tom Bombadil, who was the mistress of the spring. However, whenever Angmar came and the battles were fought, the springs were filled with blood, until it finally corrupted the river daughter, and she became the Red Maid. Since Ivar Bloodhand has came, he has awakened her, and she once more sends out her power over the land, reawakening the Whites and the Gaunt Lords. He sends us into the nearby ruins to defeat a White Lord named Brudra, one of the lieutenants of Ivar the Bloodhand, and whose defeat will weaken him and keep him from bringing his Whites to Ivar's defense. Having gathered sufficient knowledge and evidence for concern, Radagast accompanies us deep into the Red Marsh. There, while he takes care of the corrupted animals and corrupted plants of nature, we work our way through the various Whites who have infested the swamp. We defeat a lesser White Lord known as Nevin, who was once the commander of many of the shades who still haunt the swamp. This allows them to break their oath of fealty to him and to join our side in the final sweep across the Red Marsh. With the aid of the Eglain and this army of the undead, we finally confront the chief of the Whites, Ivar Bloodhanded himself, in a final battle in which Radagast the Brown reveals his true power as a member of the Astari, and not just a collector of small animals. Ivar the Bloodhound is driven from the marsh, and the tainted red waters have a respite, at least for a while, from the influence of this great White Lord.
I came too late to Bree, and too early to Weathertop, where beyond my aid, the Witch King and his minions attacked Frodo, wounding him with a Morgul blade. Thankfully, Aragorn was there to save him.
Having, at least for a time, put down the troubles of the Red Marsh, Radagast sends us back to Candaith on the north side of Weathertop. He informs us that far to the north, in an area known as the North Downs, there is a secret encampment of the Rangers called Stelden, and that it is in dire straits as well. We are to be sent there to see what we can do to aid in its defense against the forces of Angmar who are pressing upon it now. We travel across the North Downs till we reach a central spire of hills running down the middle of the land. Within this, we find a ruined fortress filled with rangers and various refugees from the lands hereabout that have been overtaken by the orc incursion. Here we meet Halbarad, the leader of this band of rangers in the north. He tells us that he wishes for us to travel far to the west to the area known as Fornost, to find out if the forces of Angmar have invaded and taken over that ancient ruin. Fornost was the last of the capitals of the Kingdom of Arnor in the north. It was where the Dunedain moved after Numinos began to be abandoned and to fall into ruin. We travel to the southern edge of the fields of Fornost, where a ranger named Mention has set up a camp on the very edge of the haunted field. He sends us to the north, where he believes that the ruined city has indeed been taken over by the forces of Angmar. There we are able to kill a number of orcs and wargs, proving that the enemy's forces have moved in to the ruins of the city. Returning with this bad news to Estelden, Halberd tells us that the free peoples of the North Downs must join their forces together in order to stop and throw back the forces of Angmar. He says that we must go to the dwarves in their settlement of LOTRO to the north, Llyn-Gileath, the outpost of the elves, to the south, and Trestlebridge, the outpost of the humans, to the southwest. We travel first to the northern outpost of the dwarves, Orthokar, because we are told that a dwarf from the Lonely Mountain, very Dory himself, who once accompanied Bilbo so many years ago, has arrived there to help out the dwarves with their battle against the Dourhands. Dory is nowhere to be found, and we learn from the leader of the settlement, Hanar, that the Dourhands have taken Dory prisoner and insist that they will only hand him back over if the Longbeards here turn over the settlement and the mines to the evil Dourhands. Thus we are forced to travel to the west to the Dourhand settlement, Ostgulamar. Finding Dory within, we are able to free him, and with his aid we fight our way back out of the Dourhand encampment, returning Dory back over to the settlement of the Longbeards at Orthokar, and earning their appreciation and their assurance that they will come to the Council of the North to find out what they can do to aid the free peoples of the North Downs. We then travel to the settlement of elves in the south, Llyn-Gileath. There we meet with an elf who has traveled from Rivendell to take over the settlement, Gildor Inglorian. Gildor informs us that he believes the council to be a good idea, but unfortunately he is stuck here, helping the defense of the elves against the orcs to the south in Nan Warren. He says that there is a great leader of the orcs, a Uruk named Drukord, who has come from Angmar to lead the normally scattered and bickering orcs into a unified force that will take over the North Downs. He wishes for us to travel down into the Nan Wathrin and to find and defeat this orc. We make the journey and penetrate deep into the orc fortress that the various tribes united have built here. Finally, in the far rear reaches of the settlement, we find the Uruk Drukord himself, and after a battle we are able to defeat him. Returning with the news to Gildor that the orc leader from Angmar has now been defeated, he as well tells us that he will gladly travel to the Council of the North at Estelden. Finally, we travel to the human settlement of Trestlebridge. This badly ravaged town has stood at the very edge of the bridge that it is named for, and has suffered probably the worst of the orc incursions from Angmar, as its position makes it the easiest route to take from the North Downs into the lower lands of Eriador, such as Bree and the Shire and the other areas that Angmar wishes to invade. There we meet with Nellie Boskins, the de facto ruler of the town, ever since her father, the mayor, had been slain in one of the innumerable orc raids upon the town. Nellie says that there is no possible way she can leave Trestlebridge while the orc raids continue upon the town. Therefore, Halbarad comes with a force of rangers to help defend the town, and in a mighty battle, we are able to throw back a large wave of orcs on the very span of the Trestlebridge itself.
Elrond has healed Frodo of his Morgul wound, and now the time has come to decide the fate of the One Ring. I can see no other path than that which leads to Mount Doom, Who then shall defend Eriador against the Shadow of Angmar?
With the threat against Trestlebridge for the moment defeated, Nellie says that she will gladly attend the Council of the North. While he waits for the council to assemble, Halbarad tells us our work is done here for now, and he sends us to the south, to the Lone Lands, and to the Valley of Imladris, where he says that his chieftain, Aragorn, also known as Strider, is waiting on a mighty journey, and that he needs to be told the events that have occurred in the north. We find Aragorn in the guest houses of Rivendell. There we tell him what has occurred in the North Downs. He says he is very happy that the Shadow of Angmar has been pushed back for the moment, but that he has a much more pressing matter to attend to, and that we should travel across the valley to the last homely house wherein dwells Elrond, and that we should let him know what has occurred so that he can therefore decide what is the best course of action to take. We find Elrond in his study in Rivendell, and he welcomes us to the last homely house. Taking us into his confidence, he allows us to know that a band of hobbits from the Shire, Frodo, Samwise, Merry, and Pippin, have arrived in Imladris and are under his protection. He says that their journey was a very dangerous and perilous one, and that they were chased to the very borders of Imladris itself by 9 black riders. He tells us that only 8 of them are accounted for by their horses and their robes, and he asks that if we will help them find where the missing rider is. Elrond asks that we leave the Valley of Rivendell and travel back into the Trollshaws to the Bruinen Gorges. There, an encampment has been set up by his sons, Elodan and Elrohir, in order to search for the missing Black Rider. We travel into the Trollshaws along the Great East Road until we see the ruined fortress of Thorinhad looming above us, wherein the sons have set up their encampment. We ride in and we speak to the 2 sons of Elrond who are waiting for us. They say that they have not seen any sign of the Black Rider yet, and believe that he may have traveled deeper into the woods of the Trollshaws. They tell us to search the canyon south of the Great East Road, down in the jumbled badlands of the Trollshaws, and look for a abandoned ruin named Minas Agor, which has fallen into a very evil state lately, and may possibly be where someone like the Nazgul would be hiding out. We traveled through there, avoiding the many trolls who seem to be drawn to the area, until we find the ruined fortress itself. Within, we find the dead horse of the Black Rider, proving that he had been there, if the proof of the evil people walking around in the Kargul who are patrolling the ruins was not enough evidence to that fact. We report this back to the sons of Elrond, who send us back to Rivendell. They state that without the horse, the incorporeal form of the Black Rider will be most difficult to track down through these abandoned wastes. So they send us to seek the aid and advice of probably the wisest person in Rivendell, the great elf lord Glorfindel himself. Glorfindel gives us a barrel and instructs us to take it to the ford of Bruinen to see whether or not it can detect the presence of the Nazgul. We take it there, and it glows with a pale light, showing that they have been there in the very recent past. He then tells us that it will be the key to tracking down the missing Black Rider. He sends us to Thorinhad to speak to the sons of Elrond once more, and they tell us to go and investigate 3 troll caves in the surrounding wilderness where the Nazgul might have taken refuge. We are able to sneak in and search the deepest chambers of all 3 of the troll caves, and yet the barrel never lights up, showing any indication that the Nazgul were ever there. Elodan and Elro here tell us not to worry, that just proves that we do no longer have to search those places looking for the Nazgul. They send us down to the bottom of the Giant's Valley, where they say someone has reported that an Ent was seen, and that therefore we can ask him and use his great wisdom as to where the missing Black Rider might be hiding in these areas. We find the Ent, but he attacks us instead of answering any of our questions. We return back to Elodan and Elro here, who state that it was impossible that it could truly have been an Ent, as we would not have been able to stand against his power, that instead it must have been a wood troll who has been corrupted and twisted in order to look like an Ent. They send us back to Rivendell to ask the advice of their father Elrond. Elrond sends us to find yet another guest at his house who has recently arrived, an elf from the woodland realm of Mirkwood named Legolas. Legolas states that once the wood trolls had risen up in the forest of Mirkwood, and that his father had put them down with much force of arms. He states that if a wood troll was able to be corrupted into the shape of an Ent, then some powerful force must be controlling them in the forest, and that we must head back into the Trollshaws to try and put an end to whatever is raising them up. Legolas is able to track the wood trolls deep into the wilderness of the Trollshaws. We fight many things along the way, including wood trolls, the caller of the bog, and many awakened roots and evil trees. Until finally we come across a great giant of a wood troll, Toshok, who is dealing with the Nazgul himself. Empowered by the Nazgul, the battle against Toshok is mighty, but finally with the power of Legolas, he is laid low and we are able to end this threat to the Vale of Imladris.
Legolas pursued the Nazgul and hindered his plans to ally with the wood trolls. But the Ringwraith escaped. The Nazgul must be found, for he is certainly aware that the One Ring has entered Rivendell, though it is hoped that Elrond's vigil keeps him blind to the secret ways. As long as one of the nine remains abroad, we cannot hope to leave Rivendell, for neither the Ring nor the Ring-bearer would pass safely beyond the bounds of the Trollshaws.
We return to Rivendell and speak to Lord Elrond. He tells us he is glad that the influence of the Nazgul seems to have abated in the Trollshaws, but he says since the Nazgul still walks abroad, he is afraid that his next plan may be to unite the goblin forces of the Misty Mountains to the north against us, and therefore that is where our path will next lie.